Hey everybody, Mac here. Thanks for coming back for part two. If you haven't listened to part one yet, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it or watch it if you're on YouTube. Once you get caught up on that, enjoy this episode. So, believe it or not, I didn't even realize this we're stepping out of the Suicide Squad now. I didn't even realize this that also in 2022, the same year as the Suicide Squad, we had Black Adam was finally released. Did you realize that was the same year?
No.
We watched the Suicide Squad, then we watched Peacemaker, and then we tried to go watch Black Adam. All in the same year.
Black Adam, man.
For those of you that, like we had mentioned this one other time in another episode, we tried to go see that in the theater. We
really genuinely tried to help it. Like, we tried to give it numbers.
We got to the theater, and we said 2 for Black Adam, and the workers, the 2 teenagers, the high schoolers behind the counter looked at us like, man, they're gonna... Oh. And we just went, what's wrong? Apparently attendance was so low that they had canceled the evening's performances.
Yeah.
They had shut the theaters down. They turned off the projectors. They weren't showing the movie anymore because nobody was coming to see it. And they were in the middle of apologizing. And me and you were like,
No.
It's okay.
It's fine. We get it. This was a sign we needed. We understand.
You did us a favor.
And they were even like, well, you know, every other movie's still up. It's like, no, buddy. You saved us already.
So we waited a month and a half for it to come out on streaming before we watched it.
Good thing we did.
It was not great. It was not great. I don't think it's as bad as people made it out to be. But if it would have been released 10 years ago when it started,
yeah,
it was definitely a movie that has been 10 years in the making because it had a lot of the tropes that comic book movies or movies in general had 10 years ago. But the industry had grown out of them, had moved beyond them.
It very much was a product of, it's not bad. It's not like an impossible movie to watch, but it's so aggressively mediocre in every possible way that nothing stands out to you. Nothing even retains both good or bad to me. It was just, I watched it, it happened. Black Adam kind of sucked for a while, and then he didn't suck a little bit.
A little bit. For me, I do remember things of the movie, and there are standout moments of the movie for me, but none of them involve Black Adam. It involves either Hawkman, or Dr. Fate,
Oh, yeah.
or Cyclone.
Oh, my God, yeah. The team in the movie.
You thought they were in a different movie, didn't you?
Yes, dude. Oh, my God. The team in that movie, I remember being interesting and intriguing.
You thought it was a different movie.
Dwayne Johnson really took over that one for me in my head.
So, this saw a little bit of a pickup in box office. This made $390 million, which is still not great.
And Dwayne has, he had his draw. I think it's gone down much since this movie. But before it, he still had a very decent pool.
Well, I think that's another reason that I think if this movie would have been released 10 years ago,
yeah,
Dwayne had his star was a little brighter back then. For whatever reason, and there could be numerous reasons, during his tenure with the Fast and the Furious franchise, I feel like his star diminished. I'm not entirely sure why. I have opinions on that, but I have nothing to back it up. But so aggressively mediocre is probably the best way to say.
Yes.
Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate was fantastic.
Yes.
The other actor's name I can't remember. I've seen him in other things. He was really good as Hawkman. The movie even managed to make Hawkman interesting. How do you make Hawkman interesting? You turn him into Tony Stark. He's a bajillionaire, okay? Which I don't understand why he's not that in the comics, because as they said in the movie, he's continuously reincarnated. He dies, he will be reborn. He's reincarnated. He's an Egyptian spirit. if you are continuously reincarnated and have been around since the age of the pyramids, and you're not a millionaire, why are you even coming back, dude?
Or maybe not even a millionaire, but like just a genius.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing with your time?
Right. So like him being maybe not necessarily the leader of the Justice Society, because I think him and Fate kind of co-led. Him having the mansion, having the Javelin, which was the ship they were flying around in, having the tech, not necessarily that he created it like Stark did, but he just bought it. Like he was wealthy enough to fund the Justice Society. Like I like that. That made him interesting. It also kind of left a plot hole, because I don't even want to know if it's a plot hole. It's just like, why did this happen? If he's continuously reincarnated, why did Fate sacrifice himself if he knows his man is going to be born again anyway?
Yeah, but like, wasn't that a whole thing with him? Because he knew that was his fate, that he couldn't see past it? Because his power kind of steps into the whole, if you see the future as a set in stone thing, and if in this world it is, you can't get around that anyway.
They didn't ever really properly explain it.
They didn't.
They honestly didn't. But I did like his Dr. Fate. The way that they portrayed his powers wasn't always great, but I thought it was slick. I don't know what anybody else, like when he kind of holodecked Black Adam, when he was in the city and he turned around and all of a sudden he's like in his ancient home, and like Fate did that, cast that illusion, or just did a mind trick, like because he knew it would calm him down. I really liked that. I thought that was a nice touch. Like it showed a superhero using their powers to diffuse a situation other than violence.
Yes.
And I appreciated that they actually did that, because if anybody in the DC movies has that ability, it's Dr. Fate. But other than that, like the low box office, like it made more money than Birds of Prey, Wonder Woman 1984, and The Suicide Squad. Keeping in mind, we are talking about 3 movies that came out during the pandemic, or the tail end of the pandemic, but technically so did Black Adam, okay? And it made more money than those 3. But to me, that doesn't say there's interest in Black Adam or the DCEU at this point. To me, that just says even The Rock can't save this franchise. And there's a whole lot of behind the scenes going on with him and this movie as well.
Yeah.
That once again, if you want to hear about that, really, Comicstorian, he touches on that. Check out his video.
And don't get us wrong, not because we don't really touch on it. It's not that we're saying that stuff doesn't play a part into it. It's just we're trying to look at the numbers and the movie itself, whereas other people can kind of adjust to the reality end of the industry and talk about that.
Now, the one thing I do find interesting, this is the first movie I was able to find actual streaming information on. And I think the reason why they publicized streaming information is that even though it only made $390 million at the box office, it was the #1 ranked streaming movie on Max its week of release. So once again, whether it was because people hate watched it, whether it was because people didn't want to spend the money and was just like, well, how bad could it have been? Or it was just people that are like, yeah, I want to watch that, but I don't want to go to the theater. To me, this is furthering my belief that the movie-going experience is changing. You can't take box office at face value. You have to look at other metrics anymore. So in 2023, a lot happened last year. First of all, we kick off 2023 with Gunn's announcement that the DCEU is coming to an end. The DCU is about to kick off in 2025. I just want to put that in there. We can bookmark that. We may come back to that. But whether you want to admit it or not, I do think that influenced things moving forward with the rest of these movies. Because almost immediately after that announcement came out Shazam! Fury of the Gods. And I have one question about this. The first Shazam movie did not do great. Whether it was good or not, it did not do great. It was pre-pandemic, so you can't blame the pandemic for its dip in sales. Why did a movie that did that bad get a sequel? It wasn't even like this was a planned sequel. It wasn't like this was part of like how the MCU has their phases. Like, you could have left this movie out and nothing would have happened. Whether the DCEU was coming to an end or not, because at the time they didn't know when they filmed this movie. Why did this get a sequel? I don't know. It only made $134 million at the box office, and lo and behold, there was no streaming information I could find about it. I don't think it was a bad movie.
No.
But there was a lot of issues with it.
I mean, we all know Black Adam was supposed to be involved with it before he got his own movie. And you can tell that the movie feels like it worked around something that isn't there.
Yeah.
And that's just a good encapsulation of it for me. The whole movie feels like it's missing something, and that it tried very hard to get around missing that thing. Like, it's not bad, it's not unwatchable, it's not quite as fun as the first one, but...
Because the one thing that I can give this movie, and it may even be to the detriment of the movie, the Daughters of Atlas, I don't believe... Now, I'm not as well-versed in Shazam / Captain Marvel history as some other people may be, but I don't think the Daughters of Atlas exist in the comics. I tried to find something on them. I don't think they exist in the comics. I think they were made specifically for this movie. And whether that was because they were trying to plug a hole, a Black Adam-shaped hole, and they didn't have anybody else that fit the criteria, I don't know. I do applaud them for trying to do something new, for trying to, like, say this is definitively separated from the comics, like this is its own thing. Once again, it did have some good moments, I feel, but it also was just very meh.
It was very middle of the road.
Most of the things that I liked about it, we saw in the trailer.
Yeah, I like the opening bit where the two sisters like turn everyone to stone.
I forgot all about that in the museum.
Yeah, like the very beginning.
Yeah. I just completely forgot that happened. I was talking about like when the whole family was just walking, and like it wasn't quite the same in the movie because in the trailer you had Eminem backing it up.
Yeah.
Please, and now introducing the star of the show, Shazam. Like, I think if they would have dropped Eminem's music in that scene in the movie, it would have...
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. But I also... what else did I like? There was one other one, and I can't... What did I like, Britt?
Once again, the family dynamic, phenomenal. The parents return to the exact same...
When the parents found out that they were superheroes, when Shazam, thank you, that's a moment. When Shazam is having this breakdown, I can't stop him, and I can't stop them, and the wizard is like, you have to do this, and he turns around, and the mother says, let me see my boy one more time. Like, she was like almost dealing with the fact that he may die. I want to see my boy one more time. I was like, that got me. That got me. They played that scene so well. The three involved, meaning Zachary Levi, the mother, and Billy. Like, I love that moment. But other than that,
once again, they're very good at the dysfunctional functionality family, but...
but this does tie into the reference that you told me to not do, because he does make a Fast and the Furious reference in this movie when he's squaring off against the eldest daughter of Atlas, and he says, "I've seen all the Fast and the Furious movies, lady. It's all about family." And what cracks me up about that is that, like, she was in the Fast and the Furious movie.
Yes, she was. Yes, she was. Everyone's been in the Fast and Furious movie.
Oh my God!
Wonder Woman.
So was Gal Gadot, and she was
killed
movie
off,
and she was in this movie. Well, no, she was back. I think she's coming back in the next one.
They already brought her back, didn't they?
Did they? As much as I love the franchise, I missed the last movie.
You're a terrible fan.
I know. So, Shazam. Not great. I would say this is the same as like Black Adam, aggressively mediocre. Yeah. The whole thing with not being able to use the Justice Society in the Stinger at the end, they were making a big deal about that. Let's face it. If Cavill in the Stinger for Black Adam couldn't bring people in, the Justice Society being in the Stinger for this movie was not going to affect the bottom line. Like I said, no streaming info available. Then that comes to, and there's a lot of mixed feelings about this one, The Flash. I was very excited about this movie. We did a whole episode on this movie. I do think that over time, after I got over like the whole Keaton Returns thing, and I thought Supergirl was portrayed very well, I do think my enthusiasm for the movie has quelled somewhat.
It has.
I still don't think it was as bad as people said it was. Getting around the horrible CGI when he's in the Speed Force, there's a hurdle right there. I still stand by what I said in the Flash episode that, yes, I do believe he wanted a different look for when Flash was in the Speed Force or when he was running.
Yeah.
But I think he also used that as an excuse when they ran out of money or time to fix the CGI. So, like, I do believe it was his plan, but I think it turned out being an excuse. I'm still very excited about the return of Keaton in that. I am still very sorry for punching you in the nut. Just one.
And Keaton still goes hard in Russia.
He does. He definitely does. But also I feel like this movie was plagued by, and once again, this is something Comicstorian talks about a little bit more, but we have to address it for this one. Ezra Miller did not do this movie any favors.
No, he did not.
Their out of movie performance, persona, did not help this movie at all.
And for those of you that don't know, just because we directly mention it, the gist with him is that he just got... what?
They, them.
Oh, my apologies. The gist with them is that they were just arrested several times for, like, a bunch of mental health breakdowns and causations from it.
Fighting, kidnapping.
Yeah, like... it was a lot, and none of it felt... I don't want to say real, but there was very clearly something going on, and
he needs help.
Yeah, they need help.
My God, you're right. They need help. Is what it comes down to, and I feel like the Hollywood machine was just get them out there, get them on the apology tour, get this movie made, and now that the Flash is over, the DCEU is over, they're just going to toss them aside.
Oh yeah,
and that's it. Now I do have streaming data on this, that this was the #1 ranked streaming movie its release week. Not just on Max, but #1 across the board. Like, obviously here in the States it was released on Max. I don't know if this takes into account, like, on-demand viewing, like, you know, rent it to watch it, things like that. But I do know that, like, the data says it was the #1 ranked streaming movie the week of its release, which it was also released Thanksgiving week. So there was a lot of people that were off. There was a lot of people coming back from college.
Yeah.
So
just a lot of transitions.
Yeah. That's, to me, once again, that says, for whatever reason, a lot of people still wanted to see this movie. They just didn't want to pay money to go see this movie.
Also, Keaton.
Yeah.
Like, and look, he's not the top of the A-list game anymore.
No.
Like, his talent might be, you can make that argument, but he is not Dwayne Johnson.
He was really good as the Vulture, though.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying he's still not a big celebrity. He is still A-list, but he is not like Taylor Swift is right now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he is not top of the charts. But he definitely still has draw, because just the two people sitting on this couch, what are our Batmans? Christian Bale, because that was the one who I grew up with, and Michael Keaton. Like,
yeah, it's interesting. Like, Keaton is my Batman, and for me, I think he's the best Batman. And I really love Batman 1989, not just for the movie, but for everything that it affected. But I think Batman Begins is the best Batman movie. Like, I will stand by that. I absolutely love Batman Begins. But, yeah, like, he does still have a big draw, and I don't think it's just my generation, because I do think there are, like, millennials, some Gen Zers, maybe your generation, not so much, because you had Bale, and quite honestly, like, 89 wasn't even on your radar until I mentioned it, and there's no reason it would have been. But for, like, Gen X and the millennials, that was the Batman movies we had until Batman Begins came out. Whereas, like you said, you grew up with it.
Because if you want to count any of the other ones, truthfully, they were all very campy, very corny. And if that wasn't your vibe, you weren't going to retain those movies.
No.
Like, people might even say Adam West is their Batman. But even the people that say that, they usually acknowledge, like, this is a very different Batman.
Yeah. So after the Flash, that brings us to Blue Beetle. That brings us to Blue Beetle. Now, Blue Beetle, whether this was the intention or not, it was announced prior to the movie's release that this was actually the first movie of the DCEU, of the new movie universe going forward, that Blue Beetle supposedly is going to be in the DCEU, even though he had previously said 2025 Superman's movie was going to be the official start of Gods and Monsters, of the official start of the DCEU. Personal opinion, no data backing it up from either of us. Do you think that was always the case, or do you think Warner Brothers asked Gunn to say that because ticket sales were tanking so hard?
I think they're in a position that they are relying on Gunn a lot right now.
100%.
I think that, like, obviously they are the mega corporation that's going to have their say at the end. But I think they're in a position where they're probably looking towards Gunn to dig them out of this entirely.
Yes.
Like, I would be in the boat to say that they're probably even hesitant to get that involved with what Gunn's doing outside of Gunn presenting something and getting approval. So, having said that, I can still see them coming up to him and being like, look, we're not telling you this character has to be involved in any sort of way. We're not saying you have to do anything with him in any crucial way, but we need you to incorporate him into the new thing.
I 100% agree with you. I think you are right. I think that Blue Beetle was not meant, because it was made without him.
Yeah.
Like, it was before he even came on board. Supposedly, the only things that were going to be canon that were coming over was the stuff that he did, the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker. And no matter what you think of that, whether you want to call it nepotism, whether you want to call it anything, it's his creations. Why wouldn't he bring that stuff over?
And quite frankly, the stuff he made is what
it has a similar feel.
Into a degree, is what gave him the reins to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So clearly, if the company is like, hey, what you did is kind of what we're trying to go with in the future, obviously you're going to keep what you made because it clearly worked. And yeah, I do agree. It could be a little messed up that you hire someone and they're like, okay, well, all of my projects are going to stay on. But first of all, The Suicide Squad was a remake of a movie you already failed to make.
Right.
And then the TV show was an offshoot that, like,
of the movie
does it even matter if that one continues? That, like, I love Peacemaker. We just talked about it. But
Yeah.
Peacemaker's not going to be dictating the DCU.
Oh, no. No, I would still love to see a season 2, especially with the
Yeah.
way season 1 ended. But I would also be okay if Peacemaker was just integrated into the universe and like we started to see things play out through other media, whether it's through the movies or whether it's through the other series that are coming out. Because there is a series coming out called Waller. I do not doubt for a minute that Peacemaker is going to be involved in that.
I can see that being a very, very cameo-heavy show.
Oh, yeah. Because it's probably going to be her putting together Suicide Squads.
And then the Suicide Squad.
But Blue Beetle, it only made $130 million at the box office. Streaming, #1 most streamed movie in the U.S. the week it was released. So it shares that. It shares that with The Flash. Half the box office made half the money that The Flash made. Both of them were bombs, but it was still the #1 most streamed movie in the U.S. And this one, I feel, this is just personal opinion, I feel like this one people legitimately did want to see, but to something that you had told me prior outside the podcast, why spend money for something that may not matter?
Yeah, and when I said that, I acknowledged, like, you shouldn't go see a movie with the expectation that it's going to lead to another movie. That defeats the purpose in a lot of different medias. However, when you're in this position of the DCEU and you're expecting things to get better or hoping things to get better,
when you know the DCEU, you want the DCEU to get better, but like at this point, if the DCEU had been in a better place and you told me Blue Beetle isn't going to matter, just because there was quality coming out before, I think people would have been more inclined to see it. But everything leading up to Blue Beetle was a dumpster fire. Yeah. And I do not think it was a bad movie. I enjoyed it. We both watched it together. The beginning definitely had issues, but once the scarab attached to him, I felt like we were watching a completely different movie. Yeah. And it was fantastic. The scene where, spoilers if you haven't seen it, the scene where Dad died and it was in the middle of that firefight and the sister was freaking out and Jaime was freaking out and Kajeda had powered down and there was this feeling of helplessness. That was a good scene. That was a good moment.
And they didn't snake it from you either. They let that scene happen.
Yes.
The dad died. Jaime was taken away.
Yeah.
Like, it was a low scene. They lost.
Yes.
But they also did something that's almost unheard of in some media. Everyone reacted to it.
They mourned his passing.
More than once.
Which was a big issue that me and you both had with the sequel trilogy.
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Yeah, Star Wars. Nobody mourned Han.
No.
Except Chewie.
Yeah.
Like, once. Not even Leia. Like, Luke did, but you didn't see it.
Yes.
And for them to have lost a character who was, let's face it, not a main, but for it to impact not just the characters, but kind of the plot.
Yeah.
That was big, and I thought that was very well done.
And not to mention, because the dad died, it led to one of my favorite scenes from the movie, and it's when Jaime is like on the verge of death and he has this like hallucination of his dad. I say hallucination, but you can interpret it how you want. It more so felt like his spirit was coming to talk to him.
Yeah.
And his dad says the line, you know, I didn't understand why I had to go when I did, but I get it now. You needed me here.
Yes.
Like, that is such a heartbreaking line because what the dad just said to you is, I would let myself die 1,000,000 times just to know I'm here to help you.
Yes.
Like, that is heartbreaking.
So good, though. This is what we were talking about, that, like, Blue Beetle really got the family down. And even when you thought they were going to be caricatures,
because in the beginning they really do push it, and the only reason I feel like I can bring this up is because other people in the culture have said this. But in the beginning, they push Mexican stereotypes a little bit.
Especially with Lopez.
Yes, like Lopez has a bunch of stuff, like the most generic Mexican music you can think of. La Cucaracha is like, what, his car alarm theme, horn
or something. Yeah, it was in there somehow. I can't remember how, but yeah.
But yeah, the beginning of the movie, it just does a lot of odd, questionable step things, but it's like as soon as he gets the beetle, everything kind of falls into place, and people kind of flesh out in the position they are instead of trying to fit into something that they're not. Specifically Lopez. Lopez does a really good job throughout this movie.
Now that we're talking about it, though, and I'm thinking back on the career, and we talked about how he was kind of like stereotypical in the beginning. We cannot ignore that Lopez made a career doing that up until this point.
Yeah. I mean...
So a lot of that may have been like just his way of portraying things coming out. But once again, once Kajeda showed up, once they once the scarab attached itself to him, first of all, the effects for the suit were fantastic.
A lot of clothes burning, yeah.
Oh yeah, like, and when he was wearing the full suit, a lot of it was practical, and they just like CG'd in the wings and the weapons and everything. What took us completely off guard, we didn't see until the credits. Becky G was the voice of Kajida.
Yeah. like it's not coming from a complaint standpoint or anything, but it was just like Becky G was the okay, all right. Didn't even hear it.
And in every interpretation of Kajida I've seen in cartoons before, and even in, it's a comic book, so like they don't reference male or female, masculine or feminine, but just from the dialogue in the comic, I think the majority of people heard a male voice. And then in the cartoons, in Brave and the Bold and Young Justice, it was a overly aggressive male voice. That when they first released that, or when they showed in the trailer that Kajida was going to be a female, a female voice, that took me some getting used to, because it was like years of being used to one thing. Like, I wasn't against it, don't get me wrong. It's not me saying Kajida can't be female. It was just like, you're so used to one thing, and I was worried that was going to take me out of it. But it worked. It really worked, because instead of just like two dudes, two male voices going back and forth to each other, I feel like one of the things that makes the conversations between Brock and Venom not very interesting is that it's basically him having a conversation with himself.
Yes.
Literally, because Hardy does the voice of Venom too, that like you're just hearing two voices that are similar to each other going at it. Whereas like where you had Jaime and you had Kajida, one was male, one was female, one was masculine, one was feminine, like there was contrast between the two personalities. Like, not combative contrast, but like it stood out. This is Jaime, this is Kajida.
And it doesn't even necessarily have to be gender either, because if you go back to Tony and Jarvis, his voice stands out.
American and English.
Yeah.
Or British, rather.
But they're both still male, but Jarvis has a much smoother, much delicate tone, whereas Tony is like...
high dialect.
Yeah, he's sarcastic, he's fun. So you still have that difference of sound, and it's still male, it still is two guys talking to each other, but because they've been portrayed with such different personalities, it still is an interesting combination to hear them talk, because they give different viewpoints, even though one's a computer. So you switch to this, and I get a similar feeling to this that I get with like Peter and Monday. His like Iron Maiden,
Iron Spider.
Iron Spider.
I might cut in an Iron Maiden song right here. Okay.
You know, Iron Maiden. But it kind of gives me the feel to his suit. Because his suit, in contrast to Jarvis, Tony made his voice very motherly, very nurturing, very kind, very soft. So again, it stands out because Peter has this very youthful voice, this very energetic, high-pitched voice, and then his underlying tone in his computer is very soft.
Yeah.
It's very, very calm. It's very direct, not aggressive,
Right.
but very direct. And I think that just carries over to the Blue Beetle. Once you get to the end and they are actually talking to each other, that sarcasm does start to pick its head up, and it's like, oh, this is a cool dynamic because it isn't a computer. This is a sentient thing that can just straight up be like, I don't want to do that.
One of my favorite interactions between Jaime and Kajida, and I told you this after we watched it, he was fighting Cartax. I can't remember what. I think it was Cartax.
Syntax, yeah.
I can't remember what his actual name was. The big bad at the end. The red beetle. Basically the red beetle. The big CGI monstrosity that had all of the same powers as our hero. No, OMAC was
the program.
Was the program, yeah. But when he had him beaten, I almost said Carfax. When he had him beaten and he was on the ground, and he had the blade out and he was trying to kill, and I think he stabbed the ground next to him, and he said, "Why?" And his mask was split open at this point. He had taken damage that his mask had split open, and you can see his face on one side, and he's angry and he's saying, "Why? Why won't you let me?" And the camera pans around to the unbroken side of the mask, and it's Kajida. Because we don't kill. It was so cool, how they did that simple camera pan that, you saw two different entities. You saw Jaime, you saw Kajida, and they were having a conversation with each other. It's not a big moment. I'm not even saying it's a heartfelt moment. I just thought that was a really slick moment of having the interaction between them.
And it's also the moment where everything becomes a lot more real, because earlier when Jaime says we're not killers, it's just kind of because the Blue Beetle's doing what it wants and is just, messing, or not. It's the Scarab, not the Blue Beetle.
It's in attack mode.
Yeah, basically. And when he says that, even the Scarab is like, okay, whatever. So when it comes back around in that scene, and while you are right, I do agree with you, the camera and everything is really cool in that scene. But just the context of it, to me, is what makes it heavy. Because, this, like you said, the scene itself isn't that big. But it's the fact that Jaime has changed so much from point A to point B, that he let that part of himself go, that he now has this thing that he had to talking him out of it, that it's like, am I losing control or am I in control?
And I feel like this would have been a much more poignant moment if we hadn't seen the family already killing a bunch of people.
Yeah. Grandma with the Gatling gun.
That whole thing started to get a little too heavy-handed for me. I'm not even sure heavy-handed is the right way to phrase it. But
camp.
Yeah, because Grandma's toting around a laser minigun and just hosing people down. At that point, what did they need Jaime for to escape?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm cool with the grandma being a revolutionary, because that piece of information was cool, but I would have liked it to have been a little more grounded, where she pulls off maybe this one move that gets everyone out of danger or something, and then she's like, you know what, I can't carry this giant gun.
Or she's the one that's doing the planning because she's done this before. I don't that part of the movie. It didn't kill the movie for me, but I could have done if they would have done something different with that.
It took me out slightly.
Yeah.
It very much made the moment not have the gravitas that it should have had for the story that it was telling. But it didn't ruin it. It didn't kill the moment. It just did not enhance what it could have.
So after Blue Beetle, we have the final movie of the year, which is the final... other than, I'm not sure when the Batman 2 or Joker 2 is coming out.
But truthfully, that's not
even the same thing.
Yeah.
But the final DCEU movie ever, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. It came out was that December, just a couple months ago. We know that it made $300 million at the box office, which is a astronomical decline from the first Aquaman movie. But let me see something. Between 2018, when Aquaman broke $1 billion, and just 5 years later, 5 years to bring out the sequel, it had a $700 million decline. And while that is more than Blue Beetle and The Flash, it's less than Black Adam. And because of how new this movie is, we don't have any streaming information on it, so I can't say whether it's going to do well on streaming service or not. So that is the end of the DCEU, and I had mentioned before that the DCEU was a failed experiment, and so the answer to the question of what experiment are you talking about, Mac, it is the experiment of corporate suits trying to dictate the direction of a joined universe, of a joined cinematic universe. Because while I have my issues with Zack Snyder, he is not I do not see him as the great director a lot of people portray him as. I do not blame him for this. No. Maybe the Snyder cut and all the BS that went with that. Yes. However, this is the guy that did the 300 and Sucker Punch and The Watchmen. When they handed him the keys to the kingdom, they knew what they were getting, or at least they should have known what they were getting. And love it or hate it, you cannot deny that Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and even the Snyder Cut all has a similar aesthetic. Yes. And if they would have let him continue, and I'm not even saying that would have been the right decision, we don't know, like in another somewhere in the multiverse, the Snyderverse is still existing, but if he would have continued, who knows what would have happened. Do I think it would have been a success?
No. But I'm just saying that I don't think it would have been a success. I do think it would have adapted at some point. I do think it would have been able to flesh itself out to a different degree.
Because quite honestly, I don't think Zach would have. I think Zach would have ran out of ideas.
I mean, between 3 movies, my God, how many plots did he go through?
Yeah. The thing that kills me about Batman v Superman is when the issue was brought up that Doomsday wasn't really Doomsday. He was a clone that Lex created in a vat. And he actually said, well, the real Doomsday is still out there. To what end? Kill Superman again?
Yeah. Are you going to do the exact same thing just with a different plot this time?
So if we look at this, like, we've been going through these movies, we've been going down the timeline, and there's one thing that I think needs to have attention drawn to it. If we start at the Green Lantern, okay, in 2011, Green Lantern. In 2013, Man of Steel. There's 2 years between that, and like we said, Man of Steel had to have started production before Green Lantern. So we had Man of Steel in 2013. In 2016, that's 3 years later, we have Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. 3 years later for a sequel to come out, that's not an unreasonable turnaround time, because especially with the same director, as he was filming Man of Steel and he knew he was going to get a sequel, he was probably already planning stuff. But then 2016, Batman v Superman. 2016, Suicide Squad. 2017, Wonder Woman. 2017, Justice League. 2018, Aquaman. 2019, Shazam. 2020, Birds of Prey. 2021, Wonder Woman 84. 2021, The Snyder Cut. 2022, The Suicide Squad. 2022, Black Adam. 2023, Shazam, Flash, Blue Beetle, Aquaman. They never let the franchise ferment. They never let a movie come out, see what worked, see what didn't. Marvel did not start making 5 movies a year or whatever they do now. They would make one movie, they would wait a couple of years, the second movie would come out. They would wait a couple of years, maybe a year, the third movie would come out.
Now, granted, they were making movies in between those, but it still wasn't like 4 movies a year. I think it was 2.
And I don't think DC learned anything from their mistakes. They would just see this movie didn't make $1 billion, and because they were already in production for the next movie, the corporate overlords would panic and try to course correct way too hard and go in the opposite direction, rather than sitting down like rational adults and saying, okay, this didn't work. Why didn't it? How can we fix this in the next one? Well, what are we going to do about Suicide Squad? Suicide Squad is already in production. That's going to live and die on its own merits. Let's talk about Wonder Woman. You know what I mean? Like, because that would have been the next one. Like, let's talk about Wonder Woman, what we learned from the failures of the last movie. I don't think they ever took time to learn what their mistakes were. And their number one mistake was there was no central vision for any of this. Once again, going back to the original trilogy that we're talking about, Man of Steel, Dawn of Justice, the Snyder cut of the Justice League. Love it or hate it, there was a vision. There was a story arc through that. Whether or not that was going to continue after Justice League, maybe in Justice League 2, but like if he would have, how that would have affected the other movies that spawned out of that, who knows? What Kevin Feige brought to the MCU, as well as a lot of other people that were helping him, Favreau, who was the godfather of the MCU, is you can get this, especially in the very early days of the MCU, that there is a love for the source material. There is a love for the comics. There is a love for the history that they have, not just in Marvel, not just in comicdom, but like the history they have in this world, in the country, the effect they've had on pop culture. Like, there is a love and appreciation of that.
So much to say that as someone who hasn't read a lot of comics, there are scenes that I've seen in the MCU, like the way that it's framed in a shot, that is so awkward in a film standpoint that I'm like, this has to be a shot from a comic book. Because it's not that it's bad, but there's just some scenes that you're like, this is weird.
Yeah.
The way that this is shot. And it's not just like, oh, it's an aesthetic shot, so we're doing it. It's like the framing, the items that are even in the picture seem meticulous.
And there's one image for a Marvel movie that stands out to me more than anything. It's not even an MCU movie. It predates the MCU. In the original Ghost Rider with Nick Cage, when, I know we're going way off the rails here, but like when the Ghost Rider drives off the roof of a building and the fall goes into slow motion and his arm comes out and the chain wraps around, okay? It's a very awkward pose. It doesn't make any sense in the moment, but as a huge fan of Ghost Rider, I looked at the screen and I said, that is the cover of issue 15. So that plays right into what you were saying. Now, in Dawn of Justice, there were some scenes that were lifted out of The Dark Knight Returns. We cannot argue that. But I think where The Dark Knight Returns fails, or I'm sorry, not The Dark Knight Returns. Wow, not The Dark Knight Returns. Where Dawn of Justice fails.
We're taking a hard turn. Where The Dark Knight Returns fails is, first of all, Frank Miller garbage.
Where Dawn of Justice fails, and his whole take on Batman v Superman in general is that, like, and he has this issue, I feel, because I think this has come up in Rebel Moon, that a lot of people have commented on this. He takes really cool moments from the source material, from The Dark Knight Returns, from the death of Superman. He takes these iconic moments and he mashes everything in together without seemingly knowing what makes them cool. Like, you can't just put Batman standing on a gargoyle with a lightning bolt behind it and expect people to go, this is a masterpiece, when, like, out of context, it makes no sense. It doesn't make sense with anything else that's going on. Like, you can't just take cool moments out of stories, mash them together, and expect people to react to them the same way they did when they first read them. if there's nothing that binds everything together.
And if you try to make every scene an iconic image, pose, reference to some big moment, ultimately you're muddying the water entirely.
When
no pose is going to stand out.
When everything's iconic, nothing will be iconic.
Yeah.
Syndrome. The greatest Fantastic Four movie ever made. Now, I do think there are some other things that need to be talked about with this. That in 2011, after the Green Lantern launched and before Man of Steel came out, in 2011, that was the launch of the New 52. We had talked about that. That I'm not going to go into what the New 52 was, but it was not in great detail, but in a nutshell, it was basically a rebranding of DC. They canceled all of their comics, and everything started with issue 1. It was supposed to be a rebranding. It was supposed to be a whole new world, and it was supposed to be a more darker, grittier take on the DC comic universe that, once again, they were taking all of the wrong lessons from Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. I mean, like, as good as the Dark Knight trilogy was, and I don't blame Nolan directly, like, that trilogy led to a lot of problems in the DC industry. Not that he planned it that way. They just took a lot of the wrong messaging from it. So with the launch of the New 52, Man of Steel was basically cast in that New 52 era. More muted colors. The red trunks were gone. A more grittier, grimdark version of Superman. And that is what we got with Man of Steel.
And this is also the era of movies being dark.
Yes.
Not thematically, visually, you just can't see half the scenes.
So by the time 2011 pops up, Man of Steel comes out in 2013. Batman v Superman comes out in 2016, which is still being shot in that grimdark New 52 era. In 2016, the Rebirth story arc began. This was the end of the New 52. The New 52 also was a failed experiment. So it started in 2011, ended just 5 years later with Rebirth. It did not last long. So now you have this cinematic universe that's rooted in a failed experiment, that is like rooted itself in like a failed reboot. So like I feel that the Snyder movies, the Snyderverse, drew from two main fan bases. The Zack Snyder, like the Snyder Bros, let's just say it. There's a lot of people that like follow him as a director, they love him. Great, more power to you. But also people that were introduced to DC Comics from the New 52, because this, for them, this might have been the cinematic equivalent of what they were reading in the comics right now. The New 52 was so not great to me and a lot of other people that I knew. We stopped reading comics because of the New 52. Like, people kept on reading Marvel.
Yeah.
But I wasn't a Marvel reader. I stopped reading comics because it wasn't doing anything. Like, I did not like the New 52. I didn't like the direction it was going in. And to me, it was like, okay, this is the new direction. I'm out. I did not find out about Rebirth. Like, this is how out of comics I was. Rebirth started in 2016, brought about the end of the New 52. The New 52 Superman, who is the Superman that the Snyderverse Superman was based on, was killed. Literally killed, and then replaced with the classic Superman in continuity. In the comics, they found the original Clark, like, in hibernation in the black Rebirth suit, and, like, the New 52 Superman was burned down, and they were like, we don't have a Superman. And then, like, Clark shows up and is like, I'm here, Lois. Like,
I heard there was a doppelganger. No need to worry, guys.
So you have these movies based on things that the general public, not everybody, but the general public has rejected. There's something else that I want to talk about. That Aquaman broke $1 billion in 2018. Shazam took a massive dip, lowest DC box office ever to that point in 2019. This was also where I believe this is also about the time where, not as much as it's talked about now, but like spatterings of superhero fatigue started to rear up to explain movies that were doing bad at the box office. However, it is also worth noting that Joker came out in 2019, a DC movie not attached to the DCEU, and that broke $1 billion. So you can't use that as an excuse. Because also in 2022, just before Black Adam came out, holy crap, I'm just realizing everything that happened in 2022. That just before Black Adam came out, The Batman came out, $770 million. And I can't remember if that was same day streaming or not either. But
I don't think so.
No, that's right, because we had to wait.
Yeah.
So you came over and watched it. That's right. So in 2022, we had The Suicide Squad, The Batman, Peacekeeper, and then we closed out the year with Black Adam.
You mean Peacemaker?
Oh yeah, Peacemaker, not Peacekeeper. Peacemaker, and then we closed out the year with Black Adam. And while I was not a fan of the Batman, I totally understand why that was popular. And I don't think it was in any small part as a reaction to the DCEU. That the Batman, my personal thoughts on it aside, managed to capture that dark, edgy, quote-unquote, realistic aesthetic that they had been trying to shoot for, but still was a good story. Ended with hope. Go figure. Literally ended in the sun.
Like,
yeah.
For a movie that literally starts at night with the rain, ends polar opposite in the sun.
Yeah.
And like the message genuinely is hope. Like, if we work together, if we figure this out, we still have a chance at making a better life here.
Yeah.
Like, it can be gritty, it can be dark, it can be really rooted in reality, but it doesn't have to be dark.
It didn't really have much in the way of comedy either. Like, when they did have comedy, it was kind of, I'm calling it unintentional comedy, but like, I don't mean that the director didn't mean it to be funny. Because I do think, I mean, there was a wang sound when he hit the bridge. When he pulled up the flights, or he zipped up the wingsuit and he was trying to fly for the first time, that it was kind of reminiscent to Batman Begins, when he fell off the fire escape, hit the building, and it was just like, ugh. And then like the next morning he has all those bruises and Alfred's asking him about it, that like when he did the rough fall in the flight suit and he hit the bridge, there was a wang sound when he hit it. I think that was supposed to be a little bit of a snicker. Or even when he tried to grapple up into the one window at the time, and he just sort of came up like a cannonball.
Yeah.
There was no style to the way he came in. But that those two movies, to me, I shouldn't say discount, but like it kind of quells the whole superhero fatigue idea. They're two movies that were not connected with each other than being, Bat family movies. When I say connected, I mean the whole joined universe thing. Were not part of the DCEU, and may have even done well in response to what was happening with the DCEU.
I mean, they are thematically different.
Yes.
Like, it is not over-the-top action. As a matter of fact, Joker barely even has action in it.
Yeah. It has violence, but not action. Yeah.
Like
until you get to the end with the riot.
Yeah, but even with that, Joker is very theatrical.
Oh yeah.
So even though they're riot, I know. Even the riots at the end still felt very, for lack of a better term, over the top.
Yeah, I haven't seen Joker yet still. And it's not that I'm boycotting it or anything. I just haven't had a chance to see it yet. But when I see things like the riots in the trailers, in just like clips, those riots to me, bring up images of, I don't know if you've ever heard of or seen a movie called The Warriors.
I have, yes.
Like,
yes.
it brings, like, especially since it's set in the 70s, like, it brings images like that to, like, into my mind. And when I think of Joker, and you talk about the theatrics, I kind of have to laugh, because when I think of Joker, the movie, and, like, what stands out in my mind, having not seen the whole thing, it's not him sitting on the stage and shooting the talk show host. It's him dancing down the freaking stairs. And I know that's the poster, but like, I don't see the poster. I see him tap dancing down the stairs and kicking up sparks.
And it's, the scene is crazy, because I'm not going to say what happens, but the thing that leads into that scene is not a scene you would celebrate after. Like, that's what's so twisted about it.
Okay.
He's like dancing down it, and it's like to Frank Sinatra and everything. And the scene right before it, you're like, dude, you're not okay.
Okay. All right. And going along with that theatrics, okay, with the sequel, now that we're talking about it, and now that, like, I completely I completely agree that, like, it is a very theatrical movie, just from the bits that I've seen, once again, not having seen the whole thing. At first, when they announced Gaga as Harley, I was like,
I reacted the same way.
But the more I started to think about it, I was like, yeah.
This might work. Honestly, I think it's because A Star is Born. I think that's what gave, because I'm not going to sit here and say I really like that movie or anything. I think it was overhyped, but I do think Lady Gaga performed really well in it.
Yeah.
And if the director can nail her direction, I think it can work really, really well.
Yeah.
Because Gaga has a knack for unhinged.
Yes.
So I really want to see that with Joker. Especially that version of Joker.
And one other thing that I want to talk about, because I think this is just like a thorn in the side of the whole thing. It was never meant to be called the DCEU. It was never meant to be called the DC Extended Universe. That, I forget who coined that phrase. It was a reporter, and it just kind of stuck. That internally, they never called it the DCEU. They called it the DCCU, the DC Cinematic Universe, which was basically just a play off of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is why I kind of love that instead of calling it phases, Gunn was like, this is chapter 1, Gods and Monsters. That's interesting to me. Like, DCU, the DC Universe, was predestined before he came on, because that was when DC, they're trying to righten the ship. Like, even the comics now are called DCU, DC Universe. Like, this is the thing where they're like trying to streamline everything. But calling it Gods and Monsters rather than Phase 1, Phase 2, like Chapter 1, Gods and Monsters, I think is fantastic. And it really plays into, like, the comic aspect of things. But it was Jim Lee on a panel at a con was the first time anyone in Warner Brothers or DC officially called it the DCEU. Jim Lee, if you don't know, is like an artist for comics. I forget what he actually was to DC at the time, because his role has changed numerous times over the past couple of years. But he just said the DCEU, and it was at that point that Warner Brothers was like, well, it is what it is. It's ending in 3 years anyway. But I think that is what the failed experiment is. That you cannot have something like this without a central vision. You cannot have something like this without a central vision of somebody that has a love and appreciation of the source material. And I don't mean they need to be a comics nerd, but they need to at least understand what they're working with. Like, I don't think Feige has read every comic. He would probably love you to think that he has, but I think he's more like Raimi, where like Raimi grew up reading Spider-Man. Raimi grew up as a fan of Spider-Man. Sam Raimi, like, he does not consider himself a Spider-Man historian, but he put out 2.5 really good movies.
You can choose your parts in that third one.
Yeah.
No, and I agree with you, but it's worth noting that it's not just having that centralized idea or direction. You also need to be flexible.
Yes, you do.
Like, you can keep that idea that you want to get to, but you have to understand, one, in a movie industry, a lot of time is going to pass between things that happen.
Right.
Like, real life people could die. Real life events, studios, rights can change things.
Look what's happening with Marvel right now.
Yeah, and Spider-Man, Sony, yeah.
Well, no, I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about Kang.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Marvel, let's be honest, got quite lucky that none of their stars died or like left the project outside of the original roadie.
Yeah. And you were so new into it, and it was one movie. We hadn't learned anything about Rhodey.
He never even put on the suit.
I think if we had gotten to Civil War and then they would have had to have swapped Rhodey, then it may not have been as easy of a transition. But he was only in the first movie for something like 10, 15 minutes, let's be honest.
Not much.
Yeah. So that by the time they got to Iron Man 2, Cheadle's line of, "It's me, I'm here, deal with it." It was, he said that to Tony in...
tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And honestly, love Cheadle.
Yes.
He has been amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need direction. You need an idea that you want to get to, but you also need to leave the path in between that open, that it can change.
And you can't course correct mid-production.
Yeah.
Like they were doing. And that's not hyperbole. That's not just us talking. There have been numerous accounts of like swapping directors, not just Snyder, but it's happened to other directors, swapping directors, changing direction, rewrites, calling people back for reshoots because they were trying to course correct during production, which you can't do. Something else that I think we need to learn from the beginnings of Marvel, and this is for any cinematic universe, you're not going to make $1 billion right out of the gate. And that, I think, is one of the driving factors that, like, Warner Brothers CEOs, Warner Brothers suits were going, Avengers made $1 billion. Why aren't we making $1 billion? Because Marvel earned that.
Yes, they did. Like them or hate them, they earned that first Avengers movie.
Yeah.
They earned Endgame, but that first Avengers movie, they earned that. They put in such small hints, such minor background details. They worked so hard to create something that could interlock into one movie, and you know what? It worked.
For a time.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying the whole thing. I'm just talking like the first Avengers movie.
Oh,
but it worked. Like, it may not be the most groundbreaking film, but it worked really, really well.
Yes, it did.
But that movie didn't cross $1 billion.
No, and Avengers made $1 billion.
Well, sorry, it didn't do what Endgame did. But.
Yeah, you just like you have to work. You have to build your audience. Like the most egregious to me, cinematic universe, like the Dark Universe, Universal Monsters.
Yeah.
They tried twice. Neither movie made $1 billion, so they just scrapped the whole project. Whereas, like with the DCEU,
they wouldn't stop.
They
trying.
started with $670 million with Man of Steel. That is not a small amount. That is more than Iron Man made. Like, you made that just on the name of Superman alone. And that's why I think that, like, Batman v Superman, let's face it, Dawn of Justice was their high water mark. I know Aquaman broke $1 billion, but Dawn of Justice was their high water mark because we talked about this earlier in the episode, once you put those three together on screen, what else do you have? Because you sure don't have Darkseid, because when you trotted Darkseid out in Justice League, that was very underwhelming version of Darkseid. So you don't have any place else to go. And I don't know what the answer is. That once you put, like, everybody wanted to see the Avengers. Everybody wanted to see them all together. So we went and saw the Avengers, and it broke records. The next movie, I don't think, in the MCU, and I don't have that data here, but the next movie didn't necessarily break $1 billion, but there was still interest in seeing these individual stories.
Yeah, like, so, I think the next one was Iron Man 3.
Yeah. So, like, once you put all three of them, it's like they didn't have a plan about what to do to keep the momentum going after you put Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman all together on the screen, standing shoulder to shoulder. That was what they worked up to in their second movie, and they didn't really seem to have a plan of what to do next to continue that momentum. Because to just drop Darkseid into a movie, no one knows who Darkseid is. What the MCU did right with Thanos was you saw his face. He laughed. You were slowly building up. Every time he would make a cameo, you started to learn more and more of him. First, you saw a close-up of his face. Then you saw him full body.
Then there were rumors.
Then you heard his voice. And then they cast him. And then
Yeah.
But, like, to just drop Darkseid into it, like, anybody outside of comics has no idea who Darkseid is. That made zero impact because you got Steppenwolf and Darkseid in the same movie together. Steppenwolf has more screen time, and the two of them don't look that different in the movie. Other than Steppenwolf's big horned head. But past that, yeah.
All of this to say, I'm excited to see where this goes.
I am.
Like, I want to see what Gunn does.
I am cautiously optimistic.
I do think there is superhero fatigue.
100%.
Like, between Marvel, between DC, my God, to a point, it's just like, okay, there's a superhero movie out. Of course there's a superhero movie out. Which one?
I think this year off is good for DC.
Yes.
Like, whether they planned...
Let Sony take the heat.
Yeah, seriously. Whether they planned to jam all 4, Flash, Blue Beetle, Aquaman, Shazam, whether they had originally planned to jam all 4 of those movies to the end of this year, or if the original plan was to space them out 2023, 2024, I think it was the right decision releasing all of them, get it out of the way, give a year to breathe.
Yes.
Because, yes, there is superhero fatigue, but it could be Marvel fatigue. That come 2025, people were like, man, do you remember when superhero movies were good? And then all of a sudden, dun, 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 dun. And I'm not saying they're going to use that music, but you know what I'm talking about. Like, here comes Superman.
Like, honestly, with where I'm sitting, Superman is the one right now.
Oh, I know you love him as a character.
Like, well, yes, but we had Man of Steel. And, like, Henry Cavill, I feel, was cheated out of that character. And we've had so many Batmans. We have Wonder Woman. Like, Gal Gadot isn't universally loved, but fan reception seems to be on the more positive side of her.
I feel like Cavill could have been a good Superman in different movies. And I think Cavill, like, we heard this when he was called back for Black Adam. He requested the brighter suit. He requested the John Williams music. He even said before he was canned, like, I'm looking forward to more hopeful, more iconic Superman stories. Like, he's a giant nerd. Let's not forget that. He put on the suit because he wanted to be Superman. I don't feel he was ever truly thrilled with the direction the stories were taking, but I also think he is 100% a team player.
Yes.
And he knows what he has to do. He knows he has to promote the movie. He knows, like, he was a nobody when he got cast in this. He had zero pull, you know. Now, with what he's moved on to, he's stepped out of Witcher. He's working with Amazon on Warcraft 40K. He has worked himself into being an executive producer so that he has input, he has sway in the direction this is going. I think if he could have gone back and done it again, he may have tried something similar with Superman to have a say in the direction it went. This is speculation. I do not know the individual. I don't know the man. I've never had a conversation with him, more's the pity. But it's it's things I've inferred just from things he has publicly said.
Did you hear that there's I don't remember who the director was, but there's a director talking about wanting to make a Superman movie, but specifically wants to make a Henry Cavill Superman movie based on Red Sun.
I had heard that. And that's okay. But why does it have to be Cavill?
From what I've read, it wasn't like an interview, just from what I've read about that.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like they want to give Cavill like a real Superman movie.
But Red Sun isn't real Superman.
You asked, I answered a question.
I know. I think he would do well, and I don't know if you've read the story arc or not. No. I think he would do well in All-Star Superman. But I do think you're right. I think Cavill was not given the best. He was not dealt the best hand for his tenure as Superman. And I know there is a lot of love for him right now. I think a lot of that is a lot of fan love, a lot of Warner Brothers did not treat him right. That is very true. Once again, Comicstorian talks about that more in depth. But moving forward, I don't think people are going to look back on his tenure as Superman with the same feelings, nostalgia, or just enjoyment as like Reeves's run. Yeah. Okay. And I'm not trying to compare him to Reeves, but like those are our two main, or even like I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy that's in Superman and Lois right now.
Oh yeah,
Tyler, I think his name is.
Couldn't tell you.
But so, final thoughts?
I think the DCEU was an experiment, as you've said. It definitely was not a successful experiment. I won't fully say that it was a failure, because I do have to hope, let me say that, that they've learned what not to do at the very least.
Well, and there's also that merger that just went down with Warner Brothers and Discovery, and we've seen how they've treated some of their, like Batgirl just got completely burned. But I'm hoping they are going to give Gunn more control over this than the previous regime did. Because once again, whether you love him or hate him, at least it will be a singular vision. And
who knows, maybe Gunn will make the best era of comic book movies ever, or he might just make the most middle-of-the-road string of movies. But hey, for the love of God, at least it feels like everything is going to be overseen by someone.
Yes. And I think his success with Guardians of the Galaxy, the Suicide Squad, and Peacemaker, gained him a lot of clout with Warner Brothers.
No, Guardians definitely.
Yes.
Guardians stands out on the MCU side because while Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, I've heard the argument get made that none of them were necessarily like the top tier heroes of the Marvel universe at the time.
Yeah.
Well, even in the realm of that, the Guardians were even lower.
I don't think they even had a comic out in that movie when the first movie came out.
To my understanding, again, I don't read comics, or at least I don't read most comics.
Right.
There really isn't a solid Guardians of the Galaxy team up. Like, I know there's like two characters that are like pretty much usually involved.
There's Guardians teams, but the thing that like kind of amuses me a little bit is the team that was in the movie, I don't think that team ever existed. Those characters were all Guardians at one point, but those characters as a team, I don't think ever existed in the comics.
And that is a gamble right there.
Yeah.
Like, you take characters that arguably have no connection to each other, have no history together with each other, and you're like, you know what? Let's make something pseudo-original with this.
Yeah.
And that could have failed. And Guardians of the Galaxy is probably the trilogy that you can remove from the MCU.
And it stands on its own.
And it has its own feeling, its own vibe about it.
Yeah.
You do kind of miss some stuff with the last one with not watching Endgame, but it
You mean Star-Lord's rant in the elevator to Gamora, and then
yeah.
that what's this, Nebula?
Nebula,
Nebula,
his sister.
Nebula's just standing there listening to the whole thing, and then it's like, he left out a few parts, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, so like I hope he gets the backing he needs to do what he wants to do with this. And hopefully he does get himself in a Kevin Feige position and just oversees it and helps it lead into some direction. And on the flip side of it, kind of hope Marvel calms the crap down for a little bit.
Yeah.
And they said they will. Well, let's see.
I am, as a DC fan, as a Wonder Woman fan, as a fan of Batman and Superman, as a fan of like the Justice League, like just DC, like I am cautiously optimistic. I have a feeling that this is going to be either it's going to be really good, or there's going to be too many cooks in the kitchen again, and we're going to get more of the same, just in brighter colors. Like,
and I can see Gunn leaving for that.
I could 100% see Gunn leaving for that, because I don't see him as, like, Kevin Feige asked him not to drop the first F-bomb in the MCU, and Gunn was like, why do you think I wouldn't want to do this?
Yeah.
And he went ahead and did it. So, like...
And it was such a stupid...
It was hilarious, though. It was hilarious.
Get the effing car!
So, I am cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
I think if he's left to his own devices, this could be something really good. It could tank, too. Like, don't get me wrong. He may be biting off more than he can chew. But there's only one way to find out. Either way, they needed to do something in a different direction. And I don't mean course-correct movies that are already in play. Basically, doing what Rebirth did, scrapping something that was made in the shadow of the New 52, and going back to those original core characters, I think is the best move they could do right now. So, with that in mind, we know this has been a long one. Thank you for listening. I'm Mac, and this has been Ralph World.
Ralph World.